In a world that measures worth by appearance, freedom by exposure, and value by how loudly one can be seen, there exists a quieter truth, one that speaks through dignity, faith, and inner strength. This truth belongs to every woman who chooses modesty not out of oppression, but out of conviction. It belongs to every woman who knows that her worth is not determined by the gaze of others, but by the light of her Creator. Today, we explore how Islam and Christianity, two faiths often misrepresented, both honor the woman not as an object, but as a soul carrying divine purpose. A woman's value has always been sacred, but in every era, society has tried to redefine it. Today, more than ever, the world teaches women that their power lies in how much they can reveal, how far they can go, and how loudly they can demand to be seen. Yet both Islam and Christianity whisper a different truth, one that echoes through centuries of divine wisdom. It is the truth that a woman's strength lies not in conforming to the expectations of society, but in aligning herself with the purpose given to her by her Creator. Both faiths, though distinct in law and practice, share a divine thread that connects the hearts of believing women: the call to modesty, dignity, and spiritual excellence. Modesty is not about hiding, it is about protecting. It is a declaration that says, I am more than my body, I am a soul. It is not a restriction. It is a form of freedom from the exhausting race of comparison and competition. When a woman dresses with humility, she reclaims control over her identity. She decides what she reveals and what remains sacred. She defines her worth through her inner light, not through worldly validation. Faiths teach that modesty is not limited to clothing. It is a reflection of one's heart, a behavior, and a state of consciousness that connects the believer to God. In both Islam and Christianity, women are portrayed as pillars of faith, wisdom, and resilience. Mary, the mother of Jesus, is honored not for her wealth or worldly power, for her purity, her strength, and her trust in God. She represents a model of womanhood rooted in devotion and humility. In Islam, women like Khadija, the first believer, and Aisha, the scholar and teacher, stand as proof that faith never limits a woman's potential, it defines it. Khadija was a businesswoman, a supporter of revelation, and a source of comfort to the Prophet. Aisha was a teacher of generations, a scholar who preserved prophetic knowledge. These women were not silent, they were strong, yet their strength was graceful. They led not through dominance, but through faith. The Quran and the Bible both speak to the same truth, that a woman's heart is capable of nurturing nations, her wisdom capable of guiding generations, and her patience capable of transforming pain into purpose. In both traditions, the status of women was elevated by faith, not reduced by it. When divine revelation entered their lives, women were no longer to be owned or silenced. They were to be honored, educated, and respected as full participants in the journey of humanity. Yet modern times have distorted these truths. Society has created a new form of bondage, where women are told they are only free when they expose more, speak louder, or imitate men. But faith calls for balance. It teaches that equality does not mean sameness. It means harmony. Just as the sun and moon are different but equally essential, men and women have unique strengths that complement one another. Islam and Christianity both honor motherhood as a sacred mission, not a burden. They see nurturing as an act of worship, not weakness. A mother shapes the soul of the future. A daughter carries the promise of continuity. A wife is a companion in mercy and trust. The Prophet described women as the twin halves of men, emphasizing that spiritual worth is shared. Likewise, Christianity reminds believers that in the eyes of God, there is neither male nor female, for all are one. These teachings reveal a divine pattern where value is not determined by physical power or public acclaim, by moral character and spiritual integrity. When society forgets this, it strips women of the very dignity that religion came to restore. True liberation is not found in rebelling against faith, but in rediscovering its wisdom. Both Islam and Christianity were sent to elevate women from being objects of society to being honored souls before God. A woman who walks in modesty is not behind anyone. She walks with purpose, guided by faith, clothed in dignity. Her silence can be more powerful than noise, her compassion more transformative than control, and her inner strength more enduring than physical power. She knows that her identity is not in the mirror. In her mission, the essence of both religions reminds her that she was never created to please the world, but to serve her Creator. When she understands this, she becomes unstoppable, not in rebellion, but in peace, not in arrogance, but in faith. For the woman who knows her worth in God's eyes, No opinion can lower her, no label can define her, and no worldly measure can contain her value. Both Islam and Christianity honor her not as a reflection of culture, as a reflection of divine mercy. When the world tries to pull her in every direction, faith grounds her in the truth that her strength, her beauty, and her dignity were written not by human hands, but by divine love. And in that understanding, she becomes what she was always meant to be, a light that shines with purpose, humility, and eternal grace. In every era, the identity of women has been tested by shifting definitions of worth and freedom, and in our modern age, this struggle has only deepened. Society often tells women that liberation lies in breaking every boundary, in discarding modesty, and in living for the approval of others. Yet both Islam and Christianity remind us that a woman's true value is far beyond the limits of what the world can measure. These divine teachings were never meant to confine women, but to elevate them, to protect their dignity, to honor their intelligence, and to preserve their spiritual beauty in a world that often tries to commodify it. Modesty in both religions is not a punishment, it is a form of empowerment. Quiet declaration that a woman's worth does not depend on how much she shows, but on how deeply she knows her purpose. When a woman chooses modesty, she is not hiding from the world, she is rising above it. She is saying, my body is not your right to gaze upon, my soul is my truth, and my heart belongs to my Creator. This understanding transforms the concept of freedom, because true freedom is not about doing whatever one desires. It is about being free from the desires that enslave the soul. When modesty is embraced not as a cultural constraint, but as a divine principle, it becomes a shield of peace, guarding a woman from the instability of a world obsessed with appearance. Both Islam and Christianity link modesty to inner peace, because when the heart is covered in humility, it no longer seeks validation from others. It finds serenity in the approval of God. This sacred act of covering, whether through the hijab or through modest clothing, becomes an external symbol of an internal truth, a statement that says, I am aware of my sacredness, and I choose to honor it. Yet modesty is more than fabric. It is a reflection of consciousness. It is a reminder that beauty is not only in the face or the figure, but in the mind, in the heart, in the way a woman carries herself with purpose and grace. Both faiths teach that modesty is not merely for women. It is for men too, because it stems from the shared virtue of humility before the Creator. A modest woman is powerful because she understands that her body is not her identity, her spirit is. She knows that she was not created to compete in the world's standards of perfection, but to live in the truth of divine perfection. When she prays, when she speaks with kindness, when she nurtures her family and community with love, she is reflecting the highest form of beauty, the beauty of the soul. Society often equates modesty with weakness, but both Islam and Christianity reveal that it is actually strength. It takes courage to be modest in a world that profits from exposure. It takes inner power to say no when everyone else says yes. The woman of faith is not silent because she is weak. She is silent because she is wise. She knows that not every opinion needs a reaction and that not every trend deserves her attention. She walks in a different rhythm, the rhythm of peace. In her silence, she teaches presence. In her humility, she teaches power. And in her faith, she teaches freedom. The message of both religions is that women are equal in spirituality, responsibility, and honor. In the Quran, God declares that He created both men and women from a single soul, and that their worth is determined only by their righteousness, not by their gender. Similarly, in the Bible, both man and woman were made in the image of God, reflecting divine balance and unity. These teachings remind humanity that a woman's purpose is not secondary, it is sacred. Women have been chosen by God throughout history to carry light into the darkest of times. Mary, the mother of Jesus, stands as one of the greatest symbols of modesty and faith in both traditions. Her strength was not in her voice in the marketplace, but in her silence before God. Her purity was not only physical, but spiritual. She believed when the world doubted. She submitted when the world questioned. She carried within her not only a child, but a message that the greatest honor a woman can receive is to be trusted by God with His purpose. In Islam, the Prophet's wife Khadijah showed the world that a woman can be both spiritual and successful. She was a businesswoman, an intellectual, a supporter, and a believer who used her wealth, wisdom, and heart to strengthen faith. Aisha, another revered figure, became a scholar and teacher whose knowledge shaped generations. These examples show that the faiths never silenced women. They empowered them through knowledge, through devotion, through modesty that did not limit them, but defined their sacred influence. In a time when women are pressured to constantly prove themselves, Faith offers a reminder that they do not need to prove anything to a world that keeps changing its standards. What was considered beautiful yesterday becomes outdated tomorrow, but the beauty that faith describes never fades. It is the beauty of kindness, patience, strength, and self-respect. When a woman understands that her worth is not in competition, but in contribution, she begins to see herself through the eyes of mercy, not comparison. The modest woman in both Islam and Christianity is not invisible, she is invincible. Her humility is not her silence, it is her strength wrapped in grace. She knows that her identity is not for sale and her body is not her currency. Her confidence comes not from mirrors but from faith. When she stands before God in prayer, she carries the dignity of all the women who came before her, those who walked with conviction, who covered not out of fear but out of love, who lived not to please creation but to please the Creator. In that act of devotion lies her real victory. The world may overlook her, but heaven honors her. And in the end, when all worldly voices fade, her soul will stand radiant, not because she followed the trends of her time, but because she followed the timeless truth written in her heart. That true beauty, true worth, and true liberation are found only in living as God intended, with love, with modesty, and with unwavering dignity. Throughout history, the role of women in both Islam and Christianity has been shaped by divine guidance and human misunderstanding, and in both paths, God has elevated her beyond social status, cultural expectations, and worldly recognition. When we look closely, we find that both faiths were revolutionary for women in their respective times. Before the revelation of Islam, women were buried alive, denied inheritance, and treated as property, but the Quran came and declared their right to live, to own, to inherit, to learn, and to be honored. In the same way, Christianity arose in an age where women were silenced and marginalized, and the message of Jesus broke the chains of inequality by teaching that the soul has no gender, and that in God's eyes, men and women are one in spirit and value. These are not small shifts, they are divine revolutions that restored balance and dignity to half of humanity. The world may tell women today that they must fight for freedom, but faith tells them they were born with it, because their Creator already honored them long before any movement or manifesto existed. The stories of women in both traditions reflect this divine empowerment, women who stood in faith when their world doubted them, who carried the weight of divine missions, who inspired, taught, and nurtured nations. Mary, the mother of Jesus, stands as one of the most powerful examples of this truth. Her modesty was not weakness, it was her strength. Her silence was not submission, it was wisdom. When the world pointed fingers, she turned to God. When the world questioned her, she let her character speak for her. Her story reminds every woman that the highest honor is not in being seen by the world, but in being chosen by God for a purpose beyond its understanding. Likewise, in the life of Khadija, we see a woman who combined faith and intelligence, business and devotion, strength and softness. She supported the message of truth not just with wealth, but with unwavering belief. Aisha, another guiding light, carried knowledge and taught generations of scholars. Their lives prove that faith does not confine women. It refines them. It doesn't silence them. It strengthens their voice with purpose. Both Islam and Christianity emphasize that the true measure of a woman is not in how much she achieves in the eyes of the world, but in how sincerely she fulfills her purpose in the eyes of her Creator. However, as time passed, cultural distortion began to overshadow divine instruction. Misinterpretations and societal pressures tried to reframe religion as a tool of control rather than liberation. The same message that came to honor women was twisted by those who sought to limit them. Both Islam and Christianity faced this challenge. The essence of modesty, humility, and virtue was replaced by societal rules that stripped away spiritual meaning and replaced it with human authority. But when we return to the sacred texts and teachings, we see a very different picture, one of balance, honor, and empowerment. Islam gives women the right to education, ownership, inheritance, and the freedom to make decisions about marriage and life, not as favors from men, but as commands from God. Christianity uplifts women as co-heirs of salvation, reminding believers that God's love and calling are equal for all. The problem has never been religion. It has been the misuse of religion. When understood correctly, both faiths honor the woman not as secondary, but as central to the moral and spiritual fabric of society. A mother in both religions holds a position that no one else can replace. Her role is not limited to raising children, but to shaping souls. When she loves, she teaches mercy. When she sacrifices, she teaches strength. When she forgives, she mirrors divine compassion. Her home becomes her classroom, her words become her prayer, and her patience becomes her worship. Society often undervalues this, treating motherhood as lesser than public success, but in the divine order, the hand that rocks the cradle holds the future of humanity. Even outside the home, faith empowers women to learn, teach, and lead. When Islam spread, women were among the early scholars, teachers, and poets. When Christianity flourished, women were the first witnesses to the resurrection and the early supporters of faith communities. Both stories are proof that God chose women not to be silent, but to speak truth with grace. In both faiths, modesty and strength coexist. Compassion and courage walk hand in hand, and the spiritual worth of a woman is measured not by her conformity to worldly standards, but by her faithfulness to her Creator. The world may still argue about her role, her place, and her rights, but the truth remains unchanged. Both Islam and Christianity gave her more than status. They gave her sacred purpose. The woman of faith does not need to shout to be heard. Her integrity speaks for her, her patience leads her, and her modesty becomes her crown. She is not behind anyone. She walks beside faith itself, embodying the divine balance of strength, wisdom, and grace that her Creator designed her to carry. When we reflect deeply on the idea of modesty and the role of women through the lenses of Islam and Christianity, we realize that both faiths share a vision that transcends cultural and temporal boundaries. Modesty is not about covering weakness. It is about revealing strength in a sacred form. It is an act of faith that frees a woman from being reduced to mere appearance and elevates her to a being of substance, intellect, and purpose. In the modern world, modesty has often been misunderstood as a symbol of oppression or backwardness, but in truth, it is one of the most profound expressions of inner freedom. It liberates a woman from the gaze of a world that constantly demands performance, perfection, and exposure. Both Islam and Christianity call upon women to live with dignity, not because they are inferior, but because they are precious. What the world markets as empowerment often ends up being another form of enslavement. Enslavement to trends, to judgment, to societal standards that are ever-changing. Yet, divine revelation gives women a stable foundation, a way to live that does not depend on what the world says today or tomorrow. A woman who chooses modesty declares that her body is not for public display, her worth is not for public approval, and her soul is not for sale. Her modesty becomes her resistance, her armor, and her beauty. It is not just about clothing, but about intention, behavior, and how she carries herself in the world. In both faiths, modesty begins within the heart, reflected in humility, compassion, and self-control. It is a spiritual state before it becomes a physical practice. When a woman guards her heart, her thoughts, and her words, she is not cutting herself off from life. She is elevating her life above what is temporary and superficial. The women of faith in both Islam and Christianity demonstrate that modesty and leadership can coexist beautifully. They show that humility does not mean invisibility, and submission to God does not mean submission to injustice. When we look at Mary, the mother of Jesus, we find the embodiment of pure devotion, a woman honored not because she sought attention, but because she submitted to God with love and patience. Her strength was silent yet powerful. Her influence was gentle yet eternal. She was a mother, a servant of God, and a symbol of faith who carried the greatest miracle the world had ever known. Her modesty was not weakness. It was her greatest form of strength, a statement that she belonged wholly to God and not to the world's approval. In Islam, she is praised as one of the most righteous women in all of creation, chosen above others for her purity and obedience. Her story crosses religious boundaries because she represents the essence of what it means to surrender one's heart fully to God. In the same light, the lives of women like Khadija and Aisha remind us that modesty is not a limitation on intellect or ambition. Khadija was a businesswoman, a leader, a supporter, and the first to believe in divine revelation. Aisha was a scholar, an educator, and a voice of knowledge for generations. Their strength was balanced with faith, their intelligence guided by humility, and their modesty fueled their purpose. Both Christianity and Islam reveal that a woman's power does not lie in competition with men, but in complementing humanity with wisdom, nurturing, and moral strength. She is not created to dominate nor to be dominated, but to bring balance and compassion into a world often consumed by pride and power. The modern world often misunderstands this balance. It confuses confidence with arrogance, freedom with rebellion, and empowerment with exposure. Many are taught that to be equal means to mirror men in behavior and dress, but equality in the divine sense is not about sameness. It is about justice. The sun and the moon are not the same, yet both illuminate the world in their unique ways. Likewise, men and women are different in design, but equal in worth. both essential to the harmony of existence. In both Islam and Christianity, the feminine nature is not something to suppress, but something to celebrate. It is in her compassion that a woman reflects divine mercy, and in her patience, she mirrors divine wisdom. When she teaches, she nurtures not just minds, but hearts. When she loves, she heals not just wounds, but generations. The world may not always understand this sacred depth, but faith preserves it as truth. Modesty, in its pure form, is not an external imposition, it is an internal illumination. It teaches a woman that her strength is not dependent on validation from others, but on her connection with God. Both religions agree that the most beautiful woman is not the one who tries to outshine others, but the one whose inner light makes others feel peace. When she walks, she carries the dignity of centuries of faith. When she speaks, her words carry the calmness of belief. When she forgives, her heart reflects divine mercy. This woman is not defined by the changing world around her. She defines her world through the timeless values that her creator instilled within her. She is not the product of trends, but the embodiment of truth, and her modesty, her role, and her status remain sacred because they are rooted in something that never fades, the eternal love and wisdom of God. In the end, the discussion of women in Islam and Christianity, their modesty, their role, and their status is not just a historical or theological comparison. It is a reflection of how divine truth transcends time, culture, and interpretation. Both religions were sent as sources of light in times when the dignity of women was buried under layers of ignorance and social injustice. Faith came not to oppress, but to liberate, not to diminish, but to elevate. Both Islam and Christianity redefined what it means to be a woman in the eyes of God. They reminded humanity that her worth does not lie in her physical strength, in her ability to please society, or in how she conforms to worldly expectations. Her worth is written in the sincerity of her faith, the purity of her heart, and the depth of her compassion. The essence of both religions is mercy, and mercy is best understood through the feminine spirit, the mother who forgives before being asked, the daughter who softens anger with kindness, the sister who stands in quiet solidarity, the wife who gives strength through her patience. The woman's role in both faiths is one of balance and purpose. She is the nurturer of life, the guardian of peace, and the embodiment of gentleness that teaches strength through grace. The prophet described women as the twin halves of men, and this expression captures a truth that echoes in both faiths, that men and women were created not to compete, but to complete one another. The balance of creation depends on both, each reflecting divine attributes in their unique ways. When the world talks about equality, it often forgets about harmony. Faith, however, teaches that equality without harmony becomes imbalance. The woman who lives through her faith does not need to chase validation because she already possesses divine affirmation. She knows that her creator has entrusted her with a mission that no one else can fulfill. In the family, she is the heart. In society, she is the conscience. In faith, she is the bridge between love and strength. The women of Islam and Christianity both walk paths paved by the same divine truth, that modesty is not suppression, but self-respect, and that humility is not weakness, but wisdom. When she covers herself, she is not hiding her identity, but revealing her values. Her covering becomes a mirror of her inner serenity, and her modesty becomes an act of worship that honors her creator rather than the fleeting desires of society. She understands that beauty is not in how much she exposes, but in how deeply she protects what is sacred. In her quietness, there is power. In her patience, there is faith. And in her humility, there is victory. The world may misinterpret her silence, but heaven recognizes her strength. The modern world calls for louder voices. Faith calls for purer hearts. Both Islam and Christianity celebrate the woman whose heart is illuminated by truth and whose life is guided by compassion. The woman who finds fulfillment not in rebellion, but in remembrance. The greatest struggle for women today is not against men or religion, against the illusions that define their worth through external validation. Society tells women that empowerment means visibility, that success means imitation, that freedom means detachment from tradition. But when these definitions fade, many are left feeling empty because the soul was never created to be filled by worldly applause. Both faiths remind women that true empowerment begins with knowing who they are before God. When a woman connects her purpose to something eternal, she no longer feels lost in the temporary. She begins to see that her modesty, her role, and her faith are not chains, but wings, lifting her above the noise of the world. The stories of Mary, Khadijah, and countless other women of faith remind her that influence is not always public and power is not always visible. Their legacy was not built on rebellion, but on devotion. They shaped hearts, nurtured nations, and changed the course of history through their faithfulness. This is the power of a believing woman, the power that comes not from demanding attention, but from embodying divine intention. She is not a follower of trends. She is a guardian of truth. Her life, her strength, and her modesty remind humanity that spiritual beauty is eternal and that every woman who walks with faith carries within her the reflection of divine mercy. When she understands this truth, she no longer seeks comparison, for she knows that her journey is sacred and her purpose unique. Both Islam and Christianity call her to remember that she was never created to chase the world. She was created to lead it toward compassion, wisdom, and faith. Her status before God is higher than any worldly title, and her modesty is her crown. Every act of humility she performs, every word of kindness she speaks, and every moment of patience she endures is recorded by her Creator as a mark of strength. The woman of faith, whether she prays in a mosque or in a church, is united by the same divine light that gives her courage to face the trials of life with serenity. She stands as proof that love, mercy, and humility are not signs of submission to men. They are signs of submission to God, which is the highest form of freedom. In her, the world witnesses the timeless truth that God has honored women not as ornaments, but as pillars of faith, not as objects, but as souls entrusted with light. And when she walks in that awareness, when she chooses modesty over exposure, dignity over validation, and faith over fear, she becomes a living reminder that divine love never diminishes her value but magnifies it. She becomes the mirror through which the world can see what true strength looks like: quiet, graceful, steadfast, and rooted in the eternal peace of knowing that her worth is defined not by man, but by God Himself.